This week, Kumar and Dana discuss the Image comic series Infidel, written by Pornsak Pichetshote. Also, I'll read Derf Backderf's lengthy response to our review of the My Friend Dahmer film. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. If Patreon isn't in your budget, you can also send a one-time donation of any amount via PayPal to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
This is Kumar.
This is Dana.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar in Melbourne, Dana in Shizuoka. Today we're going to talk about Infidel, written by Pornsak Pichetshote. I don't know how to say his name. Art by Aaron Campbell and coloring and editing by Jose Villarubia, just in time for Halloween. This is a hit horror comic from Image. It's only 5 issues. I think they sold the movie rights after issue 2, or TV rights or something like that. And plastered with positive praise all over the back and front, or at least over the back and insides. I think we have to spoil it really heavily. I'm going to say up front that for anybody who wants to turn it off, that I do recommend it, with some reservations that I guess we'll get to over the course of the episode. But I really do want to pick it apart, and because there are bits of the plot that I had trouble parsing, and I think I might need to get your take on some of that stuff as well. But I think we should talk about the ending and a lot of the plot details as well. So there's a lot of some of the quotes on the cover and stuff compare it to the movie Get Out by Jordan Peele from last year, because it's kind of racially focused, or there's a racial, I don't even want to say subtext, it's like the overtext that's planted on top of this horror story. It's basically a haunted house story. I think that's true, but I think it's also similar to some other things. Like, we watched a movie when you were here, when was it, like a couple of years back, called Under the Shadow, which was a Persian language horror film directed by an Iranian-British director named Babak Anvari. And it was set in Tehran after the revolution and during the Iran-Iraq war. And I've actually watched that movie again since.
I don't blame you.
And I totally love it. And I also saw a movie recently called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which is a Persian language vampire movie from 2014 in black and white. It was shot in California. And might even include like the Babadook in the same box. Because I think I've been trying to identify it. Like, I've been seeing all these things all these horror stories where it's kind of the traditional haunted house or vampire story, but there's this additional context on top. There's an external pressure on top of the typical horror threat of physical harm or supernatural harm. And I'm not sure quite how to identify it. Like in the Babadook, it seems to be, that pressure seems to be about being a single mother. In Under the Shadow, it's kind of about fundamentalist sexism and war. And here we've got a similar difference of approach in comic book form, I think for the first time, where we've got the haunted house story, but the added pressures are terrorism and racism.
Or perhaps racism partly influenced by terrorism, since terrorism itself isn't really a huge part of the book, I don't think.
Not during, but before, because this is part of the question I had about it. Okay, so
Now, before we get into details,
yeah.
do you want to talk about this book in a sort of a general sense? So if people want to kind of listen to the first, 15 minutes or something without spoilers, do we want to take that approach, or do we want to say, all right, we're going to spoil right off the top?
Well, I don't. How deep can we get into it without spoiling it? So it's okay. So we can say basically what happens from page 1 or 2, which is there's this girl, a woman named Aisha.
Yeah.
She is an editor of Star Wars cookbooks. She has is she married, or she's engaged, or she's in a relationship with this guy named Tom.
Yep.
Tom's mom lives in this apartment block.
Yep. They've just moved in with her.
Tom has a daughter named Chris from a previous relationship, and that lady died. And Tom's mom is racist, maybe without not even knowing it. It's kind of a bit unclear how deliberate, how intentional it is when she says offensive things or whatever. Tom is constantly, he's the one that's on his guard about it. Aisha's kind of trying to give everybody the benefit of that. Her thing is she's trying to be really positive, and she just made a mistake. Like, she's like, the mom says, for example, I'll teach you how to cook Tom's favorite dish, which is like this pork dish. And Tom walks in, he's like, why are you saying that? You're deliberately saying this stuff. You know she can't eat pork.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. But she's, Aisha's like, well, maybe it's a genuine mistake, So they moved into this building, but there was a explosion in the building several months before, and like 5 or 6 people died. And there was a guy who was kind of a kook in the apartment who was moving all these boxes into the hallway, and one day the boxes exploded. Didn't detonate the building because it's a solidly built building. Some people moved out, some people stayed. Now they're living in this place. Aisha is starting to have these really horrific nightmares. It's how the book opens on page 1.
And I think it's kind of relevant who the guy was that supposedly
so he
sort of was moving all that bomb stuff into the
hallway. So he was an Arab.
Yeah.
He was not affiliated with any extremist groups, but he did like a Google search for ISIS or something once. The police found after the incident.
Yeah.
And
so that's where you've got all this kind of tension in that building.
Right.
Which is kind of where they move into, and that's kind of where the story starts, with Aisha having these dreams, really, really bad, horrifying, vivid dreams that have these kind of overtones. Well, actually, no, I guess the racist overtones of her dreams doesn't really come in until a bit later. But yeah, that's kind of the setup, and I think all that background comes through later through conversations and flashbacks and stuff like that. But yeah.
So, but the bombs went off while the guy was not there.
Yeah.
It wasn't a suicide bombing, and we learned later how the bombs went off, and they were kind of set off. Well, this is where it'd be going into spoilers if we explained all that. So maybe we'll save that a little bit. But I did have questions about that, so.
Yeah, so I think as a general comment that I had, and a sort of a difficulty I had with the book was, so I mentioned that there's a lot, I think, flashbacks and conversations and stuff, and I have a hard time sort of criticizing professional comic book artists. I don't mean the artists, but writers and artists or whatever. But I found the storytelling in this book to be kind of confusing. like, I mean, it wasn't that the flashbacks weren't clear, but they were just very, very disorienting. I had to read the book like 3 times.
Yeah.
To kind of understand what was going on. And there were even sequences where they would be flipping between 2 scenes that I found a bit confusing, but that was not, it wasn't ineffective. I think that sort of those parallel scenes that were happening were kind of an interesting effect, and I think maybe the disorienting effect is kind of intentional and perhaps, effective in a horror book. But there were other things where you would start reading this conversation on a page and you would have no idea who's talking, and it wasn't until like a page or 2 later where you would see the people in conversation. But the problem that I had with that is that even looking back, it's like, oh, okay, it's these people. It's like, okay, well, who's saying what? And it anyway, it was like those were those little things that took me out of the experience, if you know what I'm saying.
I think the little things for me in terms of the writing was not that kind of stuff, but because I worked my way through that so far, right? But there were lines of dialogue that were written for actors to deliver with a certain intonation, and it's like, I don't understand what this sentence.
Very weird, like conversational punctuation.
Yes, and I'll try to. I don't know if I'll be able, because there's no page numbers. It's hard to find, but
no, I know what you're saying. There's a conversation between Aisha and her best friend
Medina.
They're sitting on a bench in front of the university library or something, and Medina has this weird line that's got this, comma splice in it, and it turns out that she's actually, like, it's intended to be a list with, like a list of 3 items.
Yeah.
And Aisha ends up finishing the sentence for her. So when you look at that initial word balloon that's got 2 phrases separated by a comma, of course, everyone immediately is like, comma splice. Okay, maybe not everyone, but anyway, like, it just, you don't know how to read it. So, I agree with that criticism that you had as well. So I felt there were a lot of little things in this book that kind of took me out of it.
Right. I found one. So there's a scene in issue 1, or, early on, where Tom is speaking to Aisha in the hallway, and he reveals that he went through his mom's emails, and his mom had contacted her lawyer to find out if she could get custody of Chris.
Yep.
And Aisha says, "What? How long ago?" And Tom's response is, 2 weeks after we moved in, comma, so, emphasize, worried about her living here alone. 2 weeks after we moved in, so, worried about her living here. I've read this sentence dozens of times, and I still don't understand what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah.
And there were maybe, like, 3-4 instances like this where I looked at a line a lot of times, and I was like, I'm going to ask Dana what this means on the podcast, because I don't get it. I don't know. I think in comics sometimes, and in prose, unlike in film, you have to, the dialogue has to be unnatural in the sense that you have to have a subject and an object, or a predicate and a verb.
Yeah.
In every sentence.
Yep.
Every clause. Just make it super clear what is the intention. Because I'm looking at this, I don't know what it means, and there were a few bits like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so another funny thing that happens is, I don't know how much of a spoiler this is, but it's basically around the end of issue 2. So she's haunted by these visions. She sees them more and more often. Yeah. She ends up. The things almost end up possessing her, or not possessing, but like forcing her,
like grabbing her
and pushing her, and it looks like she has pushed her mother-in-law and her, stepdaughter down the stairs, and Aisha's basically out of the series. Yeah. From the second issue, it's a very strange shift. And Medina becomes the main character for issues 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah. It almost becomes kind of an ensemble thing with her and there's a couple other friends that.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's definitely the main of that group. But yeah.
Yeah. So right, there are other people in the building. So Medina also lives in this building, and she starts to see the creatures, or the ghosts, these visions.
Yeah.
And
other people sort of started before that as well.
Right. Okay. Now let's.
Yeah.
This is another question I have for you, which is going to maybe spoil things. But who gets to see the ghosts and why?
Well, this is exactly. This is another kind of maybe this is a nerdy nitpick complaint, but yeah, I had this issue of that exact question of like, clearly the visions are tied to bigotry, specifically I think racism.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess we probably want to put our major spoiler.
Okay, major spoiler warning.
Go buy the book. It's good. It's creepy.
Some people might figure it out, because I felt really dumb when I finally realized who the ghosts were, and I was like, the first time I read it through, I was like, why are these ghosts so racist and sexist and hateful? And it wasn't until my second read through that I was like, oh, I get it now.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
I don't think I get it yet, but I'm interested to hear. But going back to the point, like, yeah, who sees the ghosts and why? So they're obviously, these phantasms are connected to racism.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is a little bit of exposition that explains what they supposedly are, according to this guy who was doing research in the house ages ago. But yeah, like sometimes it seems to be like, so Aisha is maybe not racist at all. Medina is racist, and so for Aisha, she seems to be a victim of racism, so that's why the phantasms.
What do you mean Medina's racist against who?
White people.
Oh, okay. So she's suspicious. Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it actually comes up at the end.
Right.
Somebody calls her on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? We shouldn't trust him because he's white.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, yeah, call him.
Right.
Like she gets kind of busted. So it's, whatever. But it seems like with Medina, the phantasms are kind of manifesting when she's having these kind of like when the anger or the I don't know, maybe racism's not the right word, but like when the outrage against the white people, or like when she encounters this kind of hate of her group or another group, that seems to be when it comes up. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't see a real. I didn't understand what the trigger was.
Okay.
For these phantasms.
So I think so. The thing that finally clicked for me was near the end of the book. I started to notice that there were specifically like 5 or 6 ghosts.
Right.
And they came back, and then I thought back to that half dozen people that died in the explosion. And I realized, oh, these are the ghosts of the people that were killed, and
right,
because of these dark energies or whatever, and that's a whole other thing, which we should get to as well. But they've basically been empowered by this evil energy. Maybe it's some kind of genie thing, is one possible explanation, or maybe it's some sort of Japanese thing, which is also given as a possible, like one-sentence explanations at the end.
Yeah.
As various possibilities of what caused these things, but it's basically the 5 or 6 that died, and my interpretation was that they were, at least one of them, was super duper racist because they blamed the race of the bomber, him being an Arab.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I was killed by a Arab, and now this hate demon basically shows up. Now.
So, are we supposed to recognize that?
Well. That was what I got at. Now,
Yeah.
So maybe I'll jump ahead to another point, which is one of these. So Aisha sees on the shoulder of one of these ghosts a mark, a symbol, which is basically an X with T-bars on it. And then she's in a grocery store or something, and she sees a person walking around with that tattoo, the same as a tattoo, and says, "Hey, what is that?" And the person's like, "Get lost." Now, I don't think that is unpacked, and I don't know what the connection was. Like, was that supposed to be some sort of... Was it supposed to be like a swastika, like some sort of white supremacist thing?
So that's how we recognize that this guy is one of the ghosts, because one of the ghosts has the tattoo, as you mentioned, and then the blonde guy in the flashback who tripped the bomb off.
Oh, he had that too?
He has that tattoo.
Oh, I read it twice and didn't even notice that. Yeah, so the guy... Okay, so there's the other spoilers. The guy that tricked the bomb off. So the bomb was not set to go off. We're bouncing all over the place here. But this guy, he has a girlfriend. He's very suspicious of this Arab guy that's putting stuff out in the hall. And he's basically racist against Arabs. There's a really interesting scene where he talks to some other neighbors about that. And I think I want to talk about that, too, if you can remind me later on.
Yep.
But, so he says, I'm going to go up there, I'm going to look through these boxes and see what he has there. And his girlfriend's like, are you sure we should be doing this? And he's like, don't worry, he always goes for walks between 3 and 5 on Fridays. He says something very specific like that. And she's like, how do you know that? And it's obvious that the guy is, this white guy is obsessed with the Arab guy. And he opens the boxes, somehow they get knocked over, and then it sets off one of the bombs to go off.
Right, so this couple...
Right.
The old couple and the Korean couple, are those the 6 ghosts?
Oh, I didn't even... Okay, so that guy must be... So this guy... Okay, so that guy has to be the ghost. The guy that set it off has to be the one with the same tattoo. Because Aisha figures out all the things they have in common.
5.
Like, she goes through his Facebook and stuff and finds out that he likes Return of the Jedi, and he likes Korean food, and all this stuff. And she's like, these are the points of connection, and she's going to try to connect with this ghost before she ends up in the hospital. That was, like, her plan. Okay, so maybe the other couple were... But there's a baby as well. Oh, yeah, but the Korean couple had a baby. So it must be... So, see, this is the thing I never figured out, but you've unpacked it right here. So they must be the half dozen that died.
Yeah.
Okay. Because there was one that was like an old man ghost, and one was like a woman.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so... all right.
Flipping through, looking at them, yeah.
Coming up, the positive things about the book. Is it scary? And the real meat of the book that Dana has called a minefield to talk about on a podcast. Also, I read Derf's letter about Kumar and Emmett's review of the My Friend Dahmer film. First, don't forget, one way you can help this podcast is by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra, and it helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
This is an imaginary podcast, which may never have happened.
The Shortbox Showcase.
But then again may have. About a father and daughter. I'm Professor Allen.
And I'm Emily.
Who came from Ohio and talked about comics.
Walking Dead.
Tintin.
Black Lightning.
White Tiger. It tells of their rise to glory, when the great guests were yet to be booked.
Let's put it this way, Shogun Warriors wasn't going to win any Eisners.
And the great feats of editing not yet performed.
And this is Ultra 7, this is Ultraman Jack, and this Ultraman Taro, and this Ultraman Leo, and this
of how they spoke at length.
Continuity is really the brainchild of nitpicking nerds the world over.
But to be fair, the best kind of confession is the Force confession.
And reviewed in brief tales that explore creatively the bounds of a given character's history.
Red Sun is wonderful with a very strange ending.
Of brilliant creators before their fall from grace. This is the era where Miller is at the height of his creative and artistic powers, and the ability of strong writing to encapsulate and transcend its time.
Flash of Two Earths by Gardner Fox.
This is an imaginary podcast. Aren't they all? Shortbox Showcase is part of the Relatively Geeky family of podcasts. Check us out on the web at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search in iTunes for Relatively Geeky or Shortbox Showcase. And remember, we're not experts.
We're just family.
So, I don't remember how we got to this point at all, but...
Oh dear.
Or what were the other things that I wanted to talk about along the way? There were like 50 things.
So there's the scene, the flashback scene that has those 6 people
right.
in it.
Yeah.
So basically it's like it's the opening of chapter 5. So I guess this is the last
right.
The last issue, where so basically it opens up, and this is one of these parts where you've got this conversation happening, quote, off screen, end quote, and we're watching a Korean couple sort of putting their baby to bed, and there's these people like, they're fucking horrible, they won't be any help against 4D. So it's clear that this conversation is kind of trying to put together some coalition of tenants who are going to confront the Arab guy in 4D. But, whoever's having this conversation obviously doesn't want to include the Koreans, because the Koreans are also racist, but they're speaking Korean. But the old guy, as it turns out to be, ostensibly, maybe he was involved in the Korea War or whatever and speaks Korean, whatever. He understood that they were, referring to people as like the black thug or whatever. He's losing a promotion at his company to some black thug, that being the quote of what the Korean guy was supposedly saying. So, these 4 people, this older couple, and then the young couple that we've already talked about, the guy with the X tattoo and his girlfriend.
Right. But, okay, so...
I wanted to talk about that.
Right, so we're trying to... Okay, let's unwind it. I've remembered a few things. So we were trying to figure out who sees what. So... Okay, so let's say Medina and Aisha, when they're under stress, see... people are being racist towards them, or when they're worked up. I'm not sure. I don't know if it tracks exactly right.
No, not really, because Aisha seems to get it in dream, like when she's asleep.
That's right. But she's under this kind of subconscious pressure, like from the mother-in-law, which she's denying. She's denying that the mother-in-law is racist. So I don't know. Maybe. But there's this other guy who is living in the apartment, and there was formerly some sort of mystical kind of dude living in the apartment. And this new tenant is writing a novel, or he wants to write a novel.
So that's Medina's roommate, right?
Yeah, maybe. Or is it the neighbor? Anyway, so I think it is the roommate. Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
So he's found all these, like, symbols and stuff. Those don't... I kind of looked at those symbols, because there's another scene where he found a book full of them, these kind of arcane symbols, magical symbols. And the guy says, those are pentagrams. There are no pentagrams in the drawings. So I didn't know quite what to make of that. There's like maybe one pentagram out of hundreds of drawings on this page. It was confusing. But also that cross symbol was not on there. So that's, I don't know, and I don't know if we were supposed to see that as a swastika. Like when she has a scene in the grocery store and she pulls that woman aside and says, that tattoo or whatever, it's just one panel and the woman like brushes her off, but the woman doesn't have any sort of racist reaction to Aisha grabbing her. So I didn't know if that symbol was supposed to be, what is it? It's some sort of...
And it comes up again and again, like the police tape is like blocked off a doorway. It's in an X, and then like we have this scene of people talking with the shadow of the X over them. Like so, there's this. It's like a thematic image that keeps cropping up again and again. But I don't know that it's ever really
okay. But
even like the panel layout is like some of them are in X's too. It's really It's really cool.
Right.
Like just kind of like looking at the thumbnail view in Comixology here. There's just like pages where it's in an actual X layout.
So something's going on there. So anyway, that guy can see. He's one of the first ones to see. He sees one before Medina does. Why?
Yeah.
So as far as I can tell, he's white dude.
I think Asian, white or
maybe
Asian.
Asian-y,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a little bit unclear, but he sees one. But he doesn't seem to be under any pressure, except he's trying to write this book. There's a Asian girl living in the building as well. Grace, her boyfriend Miguel. There's a really interesting thing going on there too. But Miguel comes out in the hallway in one scene at the end, and he sees it. Why does he see it? I'm not sure, but it pushes him. And I don't think Grace sees it.
Grace definitely does not see it.
And
Tom's mother, Leslie, sees it at one point.
Right, she sees it. Okay. But some people never see it. Okay. Maybe it's not a matter of them seeing, but the things show themselves? I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder. Because Leslie sees it reflected in the knife. So there's this little incident where Aisha's like sleepwalking and having these visions and accidentally tries to stab Leslie. It just, cuts her nightdress or whatever. And then, Aisha fully comes to and drops the knife and she's sobbing and apologizing. And Leslie, Tom's mother, picks up the knife and sees the reflection of one of the ghosts in the knife. But then in the later scene, just before Aisha, pushes them down the stairs, she doesn't see them, and they're like filling the room and attacking Aisha and causing the whole situation. So, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe it is a question of these spirits are showing themselves rather than certain people can see them.
Yeah, but then I wonder why they show themselves to that person XYZ or person ABC. Okay, well, you did mention a little bit about the art, so let's cover a bit of that. So there's a few different kind of art styles in it. One is that photo reference style that I think it was Alex Maleev made popular on Daredevil about 20 years ago. It's a style that's not super interesting to me, but I wonder if it's necessary for a horror book.
Right.
Like, it's got to look like real people. Like, it can't be super cartoony or anything. Like, the Hellraiser comic that came out a few years ago had an almost identical approach.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think when it works best is when the ghosts show up and, like, the colors, like the Jose Villarubia's colors kind of go all over the place. And the art gets really wild and it gets more abstract, and I think those are the most effective parts. Maybe the creatures, I loved the opening page where the thing is on top of Aisha and like chewing her face. Creatures maybe could have been scarier. I don't know but like I feel like the more you went along with it, the less scary it was. A bit like Jason Voorhees.
Well, for me, this was a book. This was a book that I've never been scared reading a comic with the exception of From Hell, but this is a book that kind of kept me up after.
Right. Great.
I really found that the art and the story and I mean, this is what I loved about the book, and I think I've only been quite negative about it so far, but it is a story where I think that the terror that especially Aisha is going through does get in under your skin, like, in the way that the best horror stories do. Like in a movie that just relies solely on jump scares does not impress me, because that's easy. But a movie that gets under your skin and keeps you up for weeks and weeks and weeks. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well,
And this definitely was like that, I think.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about how there's no motion or sound in comics. So you really have to get your scare out of staring at something that is really not nice to stare at. And, Del Toro said that thing about horror. It was like, horror is when something is there which shouldn't be there, or something is not there which should be there.
Right.
And I think that applies to design of creatures as well, like limbs, that having extra limbs or missing eyes or that kind of thing. I think the monsters were pretty good early on, and then later on, like I said, I don't know if I got used to them, or they were just not as creative. I don't want to say they're not creative, but...
Well, I think they're the same ones, supposedly, anyway.
I feel like I loved, like, the character designs were so well delineated and so carefully crafted and meticulous, and a lot of love and thought went into every single character. And it really was, there's a scene where, like, all the characters are sitting in a room together from the apartment, all the young people, and it's a real, like, New York scene of a whole mix of really interesting people. And they're all dressed interestingly. They all have interesting faces. And I thought, wow, that was... A lot of attention went into that, and I think designing a monster is a whole other talent. And I think they should have spent maybe more time on that. But it works really well at the beginning, didn't it? Like, that first page was... but I don't know what they were doing there that I felt was a little bit missing later on. And yet at the same time, I also felt like 5 issues was too short. Like, it should have been longer, because I felt like it was pretty compact. But anyway, okay, let's get to... So, before we started recording, you talked about how it's kind of a minefield, because the whole book is... So we talked about the construction of the book and the presentation of it, but we haven't talked about what the book is about, which is about all the racism and the terrorism of it. And you were talking about how it's kind of a minefield to talk about it. It did kind of remind me of that movie Crash that won the Academy Award like 10 years ago or something. Not the Cronenberg Sex with Moon one, which also would have been a good reference point for this book. But that movie was like nonstop. Every line of dialogue was about race. Like, there was nothing that was not... it was kind of the worst movie that won Best Picture, I think. Because it was really just relentlessly... And I kind of felt a little bit like this, like that, and this, like, there was never a moment where you might get 2 panels before the third panel hits you with something. Like, even in the opening sequence where they're talking about her Star Wars cookbooks or whatever, and then, within a few panels there's Leslie makes this racist comment or whatever. And then every conversation after that is about it. But what I did love, like, I really did think, like, there's some serious wisdom in here. Like, when Medina says that racism is a cancer that doesn't get cured, the best you get is remission. That was a sharp line. Like, that is the truest thing we've seen in the last, 2 years. That sums it up. And there's a line at the very end where Aisha says, all that matters is the world's so much uglier than what we want to think, and we've no idea what to do about it. And that frustration and helplessness that sums it up too. I loved it. I found it really interesting. So the scene that I wanted to go back to, where the tenants are trying to team up against this Arab guy. There's so much interesting stuff going on in here. So basically, the old guy has overheard the Koreans complaining about black thugs. And he says, great, so now I've got a crazy guy on one side of me and racists on the other. But then he goes on to talk about, we're going to do something about that Arab bastard. And, like, that's almost as exactly that Arab something. He said, he's, like, very specific about it. And I kind of love that one of the things this book is really great at is addressing all those very specific kinds of forms of racism where it's not really black and white, almost literally, pun intended, but it's like racism. Like this guy was kind of defending blacks against the Koreans' racism, but he's totally against this Arab guy.
Well, I think it's an important distinction to make that he's not defending blacks. He's accusing the Koreans of being racist.
Well, that's an awesome point right there, too, is, racists accuse others of racism as a defense of their own racism. I mean, that was a great, very small... Again, everything's just like one sentence in this book, but it's like a great moment. And then there's another thing where Grace thinks that Aisha pushed Leslie down the stairs.
Yeah.
And then they're like, the other two guys in the building are like, "Whoa, that's totally racist. You're saying that because she's an Arab, but she's not an Arab. She's like Pakistani." And they're like, "You're saying that because she's Muslim?" And Grace is like, "No, because one other tenant in the apartment saw Aisha push them down the stairs. That's why. I would think that of anybody." And then she makes a comment about those people, and those words, "those people," referring to brown people, is really telling of Grace, the Asians' racism against brown people. Meanwhile, her boyfriend is Miguel, this Hispanic guy. So there was I love the way it kind of unpacked, and you only get one sentence to think, which is kind of why I wanted it to be 8 issues or 12 or something. Like, I think we get shown this stuff, but none of it is analyzed. I think it's like, look at all this stuff that's out there. There's this, and there's this, and there's this. I don't know that the book says anything about those things, but I think it was really brilliant in the way it recognized all of them and actually put them in, and you weren't kind of expecting. You don't know, when that guy the old guy makes a comment about the Koreans complaining about the black thugs, you kind of think he's not racist, and then that flips, and then, you think Grace is racist, and then that flips. She's racist in one way. People can be racist in one way and not another way.
Everybody's racist.
Yeah.
There's that whole conversation, which is kind of interesting too, where who is it? Ethan Medina, the writer guy that's doing all the research about the occult stuff for his book. He's having this conversation with this white guy, and Ethan's talking about his best friend in high school who only dated like preppies. And it turns out later he's having a conversation with his friend. He's telling this story to the other guy, and he's like, we were drinking, and she admitted that she's only attracted to white guys. And then the guy that Ethan's talking to is like, man, so she's racist. And Ethan's like, well, was she though?
Yeah.
Because I've only recently been attracted to this black girl that I met. Like, I've never been attracted to a black girl before. Does that mean I'm racist?
Yeah.
Or, or I prefer blondes or what? Like, if I'm gay, am I misogynistic? And I think that the argument, the comparisons that he makes, they kind of become a little bit ridiculous. But I do think it's kind of interesting that like he's almost flipping that text to the other side of not like, I think what you were saying was that, like at first you see these people and they're not racist, but then you have this comment, it's like, oh, well, they are. And here it's starting with something that's like, well, that's clearly racist.
Yeah.
And then, he's
right,
like,
and then it's not,
But is it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's interesting too, because, I mean, we don't know what would happen if that woman that he knew in university or whatever or high school met some black guy that she was attracted to. I mean, we don't know if she was deliberately like not. She didn't say no blacks allowed. She was like, I'm attracted to white guys, and he's like, well, what if you're attracted to blondes or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, this also, comes to the other part of the thing about that explosion at the end was my question was, who was guilty of the explosion? in the sense that the Arab guy was putting he had all these explosives. He had a timer.
Yeah. He was preparing bombs for
bombs. We don't know what his... So he seemed to be just a lone, insane bomber. It's the way it's presented.
At the very least, he was weird. He was a bit off. Like, everybody sort of refers to him as having been off in some way.
Yeah.
And obviously he was like filling boxes with explosives and putting it in the hallway. So that's a bit weird too.
Right.
So something's going on there for sure.
Right. And then this other guy sets it off.
Exactly.
Right.
Accidentally.
And I don't know what we're supposed to make of. So I guess the thing is, these ghosts blew themselves up, effectively, because this guy's the one that set off the bombs. So does that mean...
Yeah.
So the racism was misplaced? Yes, of course it was, but at the same time, he was right about this guy keeping bombs in the hallway.
Yeah. And I mean, this brings up something we have only brushed up against in this book, and that is the question of... Was it Arthur Quinn? Is that the name? The guy that was doing the research about this stuff. And I did not understand this.
Okay, good. Let's go into this. I was thinking of this, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like page 72 in the digital version, which is... what chapter? So this is like the middle of chapter 3.
Yeah.
We get this page of this old guy looking out his peephole, and his apartment is an absolute mess, and he's got a gun and stuff. And this is one of these annoying points for me, where at the bottom it's like his name was Arthur Quinn. Mm-hmm. That's talking about this old guy? No. Turns out it's not. That's just a completely... that just bothered me. It's like, why are you making this connection? There's no connection. Anyway, so this Arthur Quinn was this like occultist guy who believed that there was this whole other realm of pure entities, of pure love, pure hate, pure fear, pure whatever.
Yeah.
And he believed that humans were so impure that they needed to be wiped out. So he decided that he's gonna release these demons into the world and just wipe out humanity. And then his peers ended up stopping him. Okay, so Arthur Quinn lived in the apartment?
Yes.
Or not?
He did.
Yes. Okay, he did. Are you sure?
Well, okay. Oh boy. I was sure the second time I read it. The first time, so... Ethan and the other guy are going through boxes in the basement.
Yes.
They find a shirt with a label that says, "If found, please return to address XYZ."
Right.
Now, they go to that apartment.
Why would you have your future address
I think it was
on
a previous... This was confusing to me.
So this is very confusing, because that T-shirt belonged to a guy who used to live in the apartment building, who was also researching all of this stuff. Okay. So the materials that they found, my understanding was that those materials belonged to the big guy that they go and find, who owned the T-shirt.
I can tell you that is... Oh, yeah, because he says, "My best friend silkscreened this shirt for me right before he drowned." So it is the big guy's shirt.
Yes.
With his future address on it.
Exactly, because when he moved out of that apartment, he forgot to take a lot of stuff with him or
my
whatever.
God.
So that's his stuff. Why is his future address written on a shirt that he forgot when he moved out? I don't know. But anyway, they go and talk to this guy. So this guy has done all this research. So the stuff that they found that had all the symbols and stuff on it belonged to this guy, not to Arthur Quinn.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah.
But there's another page where they're saying, like, the internet thinks that Arthur Quinn, like, lived in this area, or maybe even this building.
Yeah. Okay.
Why does it have to be so mysterious? Like, because the way that I read it, I think the first time through, was that Arthur Quinn lived in the building.
Yeah.
He, through his eldritch experimentation or whatever, created like, you know, the cliche weakening between the, you know, two levels of existence. And this weakening of the fabric of reality allowed these entities to kind of glom onto these hateful personalities that died in the accident, right? So that was kind of my reading of it, based on, you know, just horror cliches, or maybe cliches is a little harsh, but like tropes, just tropes of the genre. But yeah, I'm not really sure. It's just, again, one of those things where it's, details are really confusing.
Well, okay, so this guy Kent, who's actually a guy that I love the character design of this guy. But he says, so these other beings are pure love, hate, fear, hope. Those forces personified were constantly in conflict there. And the energy of those conflicts affected us, sometimes as poltergeists, others as just inexplicable illnesses. And then he says that Quinn, supposedly Quinn created a rift once in our building even.
Okay, so Quinn definitely lived there then.
So Quinn lived in that old building, and he created,
or at least was doing something.
Right, and he created a rift, possibly, but then in the very end of the book we get Aisha's research where she discovers in some Islamic folklore, Ifrits are death spirits, apparently a class of infernal jinn. Some are believed to be drawn to the life force of a murdered victim seeking revenge on their killer for them. In Japan, if a person dies violently, it's believed their spirits can be consumed by emotions like hate and revenge, trapped in this world to execute the dying's final violent thoughts.
My reading of that was not, like, those were not explanations for what happened in this fictional story, but those were just, like, related sort of manifestations of the same phenomenon in other cultures.
Yeah.
Although I did like, I liked that there's that, the mention of the Ifrit, I thought was kind of a cool tie-in going back to Under the Shadow. Under the Shadow, because that was all the jinn.
Yes.
Supposedly in that movie, but
So that was, we're not sure, and there's a funny thing too, because he explains about how, like, he opened the portal and then his enemies crossed the streams to defeat him, and it turns out it was all just the plot of Ghostbusters. And
right, yeah.
And so we don't even know if that Arthur Quinn story is, how much of that is to be believed. Because the other thing is, they didn't find any of those arcane symbols in the basement of the house where they expected to find them.
Right.
They weren't there. So maybe he didn't open a rift, which means where did these ghosts come from?
Yeah, my read of that was just that was a long time ago, so whatever might have been there would have been cleaned up, covered over or whatever.
Right.
But the fact remained that a rift had nearly been opened up, if not actually opened up, and that's why there was this kind of this weakness, or there was the poltergeist or the spirits or whatever we call them. They are sort of more likely to manifest in this place.
Right.
And then because of you had that added stimulus of the explosion, the violent death on top of like a sort of seething beneath the surface kind of hatred and fear and paranoia in the building. Yeah. That was weird. So going back to that old guy that's on that page where they introduce Arthur. So what's up with that guy? So he's on that page. He's paranoid, and he's kind of like
he's a hoarder. We know he's a hoarder. He's a hoarder. So
he's a hoarder, and he shows up like in an earlier scene. Aisha meets him in the hallway, and she's like cheerful and friendly. She's like, "Hi," and he like scurries into his room, and she's like, "Oh yeah, okay," like racism.
Yeah.
But he actually ends up sort of saving Medina at the end.
Yes.
So he's not racist. He's just like
paranoid.
Yeah, he's a paranoid recluse hoarder.
Yeah. And he's got a gun. Well, it's interesting because in the trade paperback, I don't know if it's in the digital Comixology version, but we get the proposal for the series at the back.
Yes, we do.
And it's interesting because at the end of this, Aisha and Tom sacrifice themselves. They blow up the building to destroy the ghosts. I don't know how that works. But actually, it doesn't work. But anyway, they blow up the building as a way of destroying the ghost. So she lets all this gas loose. There's an interesting line too about how
Medina and Tom.
Medina and Tom. So Medina goes in there and she unleashes all the gas or whatever, and then she shoots the gun. But in the proposal, it's her and Tom that do it together.
Yeah.
In this version, in the way they wrote it, Tom gets shot by the paranoid guy. And
because Tom is completely out of his mind and trying to kill Medina. Yeah.
Right, because the ghosts are possessing him to do it.
Yep.
I guess.
Yep. The ghosts are standing on his back. There's a really beautiful.
So it's not like he's not being pushed or shoved in the way Aisha was when Leslie went down the stairs. It's like they're forcing him to psychologically. He's become obsessed with killing Medina. They've gotten into his mind. Yeah. To kill her. Okay, so it seems like he might have been a kind of last-minute addition to kind of get that plot point in where Tom is killed off instead of helping at the end. I think it maybe is better that way because it's more pressure on her, like physical pressure. It's not just the ghosts.
I guess so, yeah. And maybe her being alone is more tense or whatever, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I don't really know what the purpose of that guy is other than maybe he's just a red herring, right? Like maybe we're just he's kind of that creepy guy that we're supposed to be kind of suspicious of, is he involved with the supernatural stuff? And then in the end it turns out no, he's like actually just he was a creepy guy just because he's kind of reclusive and unfriendly.
Right.
But actually he was good and he shot Tom for Medina.
Right. I did love the setup that like way back in issue 1 they mentioned in one line that Medina was like studying architecture or something. So at the end she understood building code so she knew what to do to blow it up. That was great. A great setup, I thought. Yeah, okay, so, I did think of just one little thing I wanted to mention is, like, in issue 1, you get to see these faces on, like, CNN of, what's the name of that woman?
It's not CNN, I think it's Fox, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, but they call it PNM, and,
okay, yeah.
It's, what's that woman's name that she's, like, really skeletal? She's the White House
spokeswoman. Is it Kellyanne Conway?
Yes, yeah. So... These people, these faces are great horror faces. They look like zombies. These Fox
totally.
commentators.
Liberals can't wait to play the extremism card.
That was one of the one of those moments that were like when the art was not using the photorealistic style that really worked in its favor. I did love it. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, any final thoughts we want to say about this? It's described in the pitch as it's interesting too because in the pitch letter, like he says, it's aggressively topical and increasingly relevant. So they were going kind of theme first.
They definitely were. I guess my kind of take on it, especially after talking to you, is that this is a book that's way too smart for me. No, it's absolutely like just the art, the coloring. Oh my God, is so good, and it's really effective. I think as a horror book, but it's it's so intricate and so subtle.
Yeah.
Like those ghosts, like the more I flip through this book, the more I realize, like, holy crap, it's totally those 6 people.
Yeah.
2 of them have actually been melded into one being.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if you can criticize the book for being obtuse, or if you just say that that's part of its genius, that this book rewards the reader who takes their time with it.
Yeah,
and
or reads it
rather
more than
than
once.
being frustrated by its obtuseness, kind of goes back and it's like, okay, yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of left sort of on the fence. I sort of recognize a lot of brilliance in the book and in the construction of it, but
Yeah, I
also feel that it didn't invite me in easily. It's a book that really wants you to work at.
So
reading it.
that's why I'm saying like 8 issues or 10 or 12. If they'd taken a bit more time, talk about things for longer, maybe could have been easier to get into.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's, to me, I mean, I did really like it. For all this, I agree with you 100% on almost every point you made. I think, but often when we talk about horror, we talk about it in terms of trends, or in terms of where culture is at a certain moment in time. And I think, like we talked at the start with, Get Out and The Babadook and Under the Shadow and even A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, I think we're seeing this type of a certain new subgenre of horror coming out, which is, I don't know, somebody smarter than me and somebody more famous is going to give it a label at some stage. It's going to be called social horror or something. I don't know what it's going to be called.
Yeah.
And it's part of that movement, and I think it's really interesting in that respect. I think we're going to see more like it in movies and in comics, hopefully, as well.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this really is the first comic to tackle it like this, as far as I know.
Yeah. We shall see.
Okay.
Infidel is published by Image. It's DCP In Touch, where we hear from our listeners. Derf Backderf, author of the graphic novel My Friend Dahmer, listened to Kumar and Emmett review the film based on his comic in episode 607. Here's his response. The podcast was very thoughtful and spot on almost everything, a real nice surprise. I love it when knowledgeable comics readers discuss the film and the differences between the two. A couple points. I wasn't that involved in the screenwriting process. I didn't want to be, and I'm pretty sure Mark Myers, the screenwriter and director, didn't want a close collaboration with some cranky, opinionated author. I provided the source material, of course. I gave notes on the screenplay. I was very free with my opinion, as is my right, and served as a resource for questions from Mark and the actors and production designers. Those were my contributions. I was on the set a little, but not much. Mark promised he would be true to the book, and he was. But if you're going to proceed with something like this, as an author, you have to make peace with handing the story off to someone, unless you want to spend 5 years being part of the filmmaking process, which I did not. I have books to make. Obviously, this was a gamble, maybe even a reckless one, but my instincts have always been good with My Friend Dahmer, and I thought Mark was the guy for the job. Besides, as I told him, you're the one who has something to lose, not me. If the movie stinks, people will just say, well, it's not as good as the book. I'd be no worse off. I signed a book for him at the very beginning and wrote simply, don't fuck it up. He got a good laugh out of that. I also brought Mark to my hometown to show him the places where the story happened. He was so taken with it, he arranged to shoot the film there to best capture the visuals of the book. You guys didn't mention that. Did you not know the sets used were the actual places where the events took place? That's Jeff's boyhood home. It's now owned by a friend of mine. Those are the very woods he stalked as a teen. The only major scenes that are not the real ones are the high school and the mall. The local mall has been remodeled too extensively to be period 70s, and the high school said fuck off, not surprisingly, so they had to use a school in a neighboring town. For a small budget film, which you talk about, and the budget was ridiculously small for a period piece like this, I think this was an essential decision. I know the actors all felt the power of those real settings. It was intense. I too would have loved another $1 million for set design, as would have the production team, I'm sure. They did miracles with what they had. The only place the small budget shows is the mall scene. It was shot in an abandoned mall in Cleveland, but they could only afford to create a couple storefronts. The mall wasn't in the greatest shape either. I would have loved a sweeping establishing shot like in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That was a 70s mall. But of course it was shot in the day at a functioning mall, not created from scratch 40 years later. I love how my filmmakers collected battered 70s cars to use. Dazed and Confused is a great film about the same time period, but it irks me that all the cars are show car pristine. That ain't how it was. 70s cars were shit and turned to rusted out heaps by the time our parents passed them on to us. They tried to find my actual car, a 1974 Chevy Vega hatchback, legendary as one of the worst vehicles ever made, but they couldn't locate a working one in Ohio or the neighboring states. Bummer. I would love to drive one again. I am very pleased with the film. There are scenes that come almost frame by frame right out of the book. The opening scene in the clubhouse, waiting for the jogger in the woods, the mall scene, and that final scene with the hitchhiker. They translate to film beautifully. I'm going to disagree with Emmett about Alex Wolff's performance. He's a lot cooler than I was, but he nicely captures my teenage small-town boredom and the subversive smartass vibe that I had going. That's what is crucial to the story. I think all the young actors are exceptional, which is the staple of a Mark Myers film, and one that attracted me to him. He casts his films exceptionally well. The film Derf is meaner than I really was. We weren't mean kids. We certainly weren't apathetic or mature. I think that's pretty typical of 17-year-olds. I have to keep reminding people who expect us to intercede and, quote-unquote, save Dahmer, that none of the adults did that, the ones with experience and training and authority, so how could you expect us to do so? The real Dahmer was also much darker than the film Dahmer, as astounding as Ross Lynch's performance is. Jeff was thoroughly unlikable by the end of high school, repellent even. You can't make Dahmer sympathetic. Mark dances on the edge there, which is the tricky thing about this story. I struggled with that too. You can never forget what this guy did to 17 people. Dahmer didn't kill because kids in high school were mean to him. That's the important point. He also never ever was a reluctant participant in our antics. Not once. He loved every second of it. What upset him was when we all pushed him away. Kumar mentions the loss of the narration from the book. I agree. The narration is what makes the book memoir and adds another layer to the story. A voiceover is tricky to pull off in film, and I understand Mark's reasoning here, and again, that was his choice to make as a storyteller. He was worried it would be too much like Stand By Me. I countered that Scorsese pulled it off in Goodfellas, but I'm also one of those guys that likes the voiceover in Blade Runner. Yeah, Mark and I disagreed over that ending, which, as you note, is not in the book. Mark insisted he needed a final scene between the two main characters for resolution. When asked, I just call it a Hollywood ending. But overall, I think the film is one of the most faithful comic book movies ever made. I'd put it up there with Ghost World, which is the gold standard for me. Oh, and by the way, judging from my royalty checks, a film does indeed impact book sales, even an indie one. My Friend Dahmer shot back up the bestseller list when the film came out. Derf, thanks for the response. You can contact us by email at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or give us a shout through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Batpoles, we discussed Part 3 of the Londinium trilogy. While Batman and Robin are dressed as beef eaters, we had plenty of beefs with this storyline. Listen to the Batpoles in its own podcast feed on Apple Podcasts or other podcast apps, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Next Monday on Critiquing Comics, right here in this podcast feed, Mulele and I will discuss a comic from a fellow American expat who lives not here in Japan, but in Holland. Also, I'll explain why this podcast is going to become infrequent for the next few months. Be sure to listen to this episode for a big programming announcement. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.